Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, let's talk about it for a few moments. The context is obvious. It's the Great Depression. This is a part of the Great Depression. Significance, I'll give you a couple of significances. This is the first time the U.S. government had directly intervened in its citizens' economic and social affairs. The big government that Republicans constantly complain about today really begins here in Roosevelt's attempt to alleviate the suffering of the Great Depression. The New Deal is significant in that it is an experimental political and economic, or a series of political and economic experiments that will test our system to see how much the government can or cannot do. So what I'm going to do here is simply go through some of the programs that Roosevelt introduced to the American people and briefly characterize them. Some key terms, the 100 days, you should be familiar with this term. This simply denotes those first 100 days of the Roosevelt administration where the President and the Congress passed a lot of legislation to try to halt the decline of the U.S. economy and to begin to turn it around. Another key term would be the alphabet agencies. Roosevelt's new program will introduce just a variety of new agencies: the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and on and on and on. And you can see why they're called the alphabet agencies. They all have these three-letter acronyms. The week that Roosevelt takes office, he declares a bank holiday. This is a wonderful euphemism. Holidays are generally regarded as something positive in people's minds. A bank holiday for Roosevelt, he closes the banks all across the country. This is to prevent you from withdrawing your savings from these banks and your other deposits. He wants to keep the banks solvent, and so a bank holiday is a wonderful euphemism. We see this even happening today in Greece. This morning it was announced that Greek citizens could withdraw $66 a day from their accounts, and only $66. This is an attempt to keep the Greek banks solvent. Roosevelt's doing the same thing in 1932. You should be familiar with the term fireside chat. Roosevelt was a genius at communicating with the American people, and he did it through the radio. And these intimate chats with the American people took on the name fireside chat, and he would continue this throughout his presidency. If there are three goals for the New Deal: relief, recovery, and reform. Now, let me go through some of these new agencies, new programs initiated by Roosevelt and the Congress. I would urge you to listen to Roosevelt's first inaugural address. He's going to say something there that is unusual in American history. He's going to ask for broad executive power to deal with the crisis of the Great Depression. Broad executive power as if we were being invaded by a foreign country. This is unusual because our government is set up with checks and balances, with power spread very thinly. We discussed this with American exceptionalism and the idea of republicanism, where you have political power spread so thinly that no one branch of the government can take your liberties from you. Roosevelt is asking for executive power to be augmented. And so people are going to watch a little suspiciously to see what Roosevelt's going to do with this power. Let's start with the AAA. This is the Agricultural Adjustment Act. Here, the government is going to do something which sounds counterintuitive. They're going to pay farmers to destroy their crops and to destroy their livestock. Now, the obvious question is why? Millions of piglets are destroyed. Thousands of acres of corn and wheat are destroyed. What's the purpose of this? Well, it's to drive prices up. If you create scarcity, you will increase value. So if we can make these commodities, pork and beef and milk and wheat and corn, if we can make these commodities scarce, then we can create demand, and demand makes prices rise, which puts people back to work. So, as illogical as it sounds, the Agricultural Adjustment Act actually makes sense economically. The National Recovery Act, this was a really bold effort by the government to try to control the U.S. economy in a very detailed and finite way, establishing quotas for businesses, for wages and prices. The bigger part of the NRA will be ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. But one section of it does survive the court scrutiny. And this is Section 7A, which recognizes the rights of workers to organize and to bargain collectively with their employers. We have the PWA, this is the Public Works Administration. And again, I urge you to look at the images here that we've supplied you. The CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, we put young men to work in national parks and in other endeavors to put them to work so that they can earn a paycheck. Millions of young men with a paycheck in their pocket will go spend it. And if we can get the American people to begin consuming again at a high level, then we can put people back to work, selling products, manufacturing products, working on the farms. The TVA, this is a revolutionary innovation here in the American South. It stands for the Tennessee Valley Authority, and what it does is put millions, or at least hundreds of thousands of young men to work, engineers, construction people, building dams on the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers. This not only puts countless people back to work so that they can spend that paycheck, but it brings electricity to the American South for the first time. Indeed, I remember my grandmother telling me, she'd lived through this obviously, and they worshiped Roosevelt. They thought that he indeed had saved the country, and if nothing else, he had brought electricity to their little farmhouses. Other programs, of course, the FHA, Federal Housing Administration. We still have the FHA today, lending loans for mortgages. We have the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The stock market prior to Roosevelt was unregulated. The Securities and Exchange Commission, its purpose is to regulate the stock market, to prevent insider trading and other unscrupulous and illegal activities on the stock market. Of course, the FBI will be augmented during this time. It had been created in the 20s, but it'll take on a bigger role now in the Great Depression. The Works Progress Administration, again, civic infrastructure, bridges, roads, sewers. We're finding ways to put young men to work so that they can earn a paycheck. Social Security Administration, all of you have a Social Security number and Social Security card. This begins here with Roosevelt. The idea is that retired and elderly people should continue to be able to contribute to the economy and to take active role as consumers in the economy. You can see some of these contemporary cartoons. Here's a play on the old Ring Around the Rosies cartoon. Ring Around Roosevelt, and you can see the various alphabet agencies here as children circling Papa Roosevelt as he hands out money to them. And here you see Roosevelt as the captain of the American ship, trying to bring her into safe harbor. There are wonderful posters created during the New Deal to advertise and to promote these programs. Here you see the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. Everyone's familiar with this symbol of the Social Security Administration. Here, Electricity for All, the Tennessee Valley Authority. You see the fist clenched with a lightning bolt, illustrating electricity brought to the South. Here's a map of the TVA. You can see the various dams and power stations constructed in the American South. Here's something you see weekly in this country, the FDIC. When you go to your bank and you see your teller, or you drive through the, you go through the drive-through at the bank, you see this sign, FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This, of course, guarantees your deposits in the bank up to a certain level. I suppose today it's probably $200,000. I believe in the early 30s it was obviously much less, just a few $1,000s. Here, an explanation of the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and you can see the piglets getting ready for slaughter. Here's the Civilian Conservation Corps, again, putting young men to work, as you can see here. There's another aspect of the New Deal I want to mention briefly, and that is Roosevelt believed that professionals should be put to work doing something in their profession. In other words, musicians shouldn't be digging ditches. So you see examples of this whereby artists will be hired to paint murals in government buildings and in office buildings. Musicians are sent south to record the gospel singing in black and white churches, record bluegrass music being played. Historians and other scholars are sent south to interview the surviving slaves, the last generation of people who had actually lived on the plantation as slaves. They're quite old now, but there are many of them still alive. So scholars are sent to conduct interviews with them. These slave testimonies are the bedrock of any research done on slavery in the United States. So I guess to sum up, the New Deal is an attempt to get money into people's pockets, to get them gainfully employed, doing things that they can do and do well, so that they have money at the end of the week and at the end of the month that they can spend. They can pay their mortgage, they can go out and buy stuff, buy a refrigerator, buy a Ford Model T, buy something so that we can begin to put people back to work, lessen the unemployment, drive prices up, create scarcity in agriculture so that these things have more value. If the price goes up, we can put farm workers back to work. The New Deal had a great deal of success, but I want to emphasize again that finally it is the Second World War that will have a genuine impact in putting everybody back to work, producing material for the war effort, and then of course following the war, the American economy will continue this boom for another generation. So I'm going to end the New Deal there, and we'll pick up the Second World War next time.